Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This is our Policy Pulse. Dun, 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 dun. I need those like flare sounds, you know, the like when you go to a club and it's like, burr, 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 burr. That's what we need for the Policy Pulse episodes at this point. We talk about such exciting stuff, I think. Well, it's exciting to me because it's information to learn about. Maybe less exciting to the average person, but hopefully the listeners are above average people and they enjoy these topics too. But anyway, it's the Policy Pulse for the month of August, I suppose. And with me, of course, I'm joined by Bryan, our resident expert. And this is your reminder that this is not legal advice. We are simply talking about things that are kind of hot off the press, as we like to say. And so we'll start actually with something that I had a little chuckle about before when we were going through the agenda, which is the controversy over the Bureau of Labor Statistics monthly jobs report. Bryan, I'm going to pass to you. Do you want to walk us through what the controversy was and what the monthly jobs report generally seeks to do?
Sure. So the short version is the BLS every month puts out, usually the first week of the following month, they put out jobbed numbers, how many jobs were added to the country for the prior month. They continually revise those numbers over the coming weeks, but generally speaking, the numbers they put out the first week are fairly accurate. Last month's job numbers, July 2025 job numbers, were not as good as anticipated across the board. Just people in general, people in the know, thought we were going to add more jobs than we actually did. And the Trump administration was not happy with that, so they fired the statistician who puts those BLS jobs numbers together. The replacement for this has no experience in this area, and the administration was suggesting that they were going to just stop releasing numbers every month. They have since kind of walked that back a little bit, but in some ways they're still talking about it, about either eliminating that report every month or just doing it quarterly. So this has a lot of impacts for employers down the funnel, because employers use this information to benchmark. They use it for salary surveys. They use it for talent availability analysis. Lots of different things that these free reports from the government offer to private employers. So if the government pulls these reports away each month, they are going to essentially add money to the expense sheet for individual businesses that have to now outsource this and pay someone to generate these reports for them. So it's going to be a lot of piecemeal and a lot less accurate data.
Interesting. And I will say candidly, I was chuckling because it's, obviously someone lost their job in this, but I was chuckling before we started recording because it's one of those things that you would literally, hopefully, never see in any organization that is running or operating in a way that's, compliant and regulated and things like that. And I know that the government in general, for years and years and years and years, has always kind of operated in the way that they generally want to. And, maybe they are not, it's not as litigious in some ways because the government obviously has a lot of resources to be litigious back. But it's just interesting because I get, I get like a lot of outreach from listeners who are like, oh, I was fired and it feels like wrongful termination. And, this is kind of like an example of that, assuming that the information that we have is accurate, which is that he or she was fired because of the report being less than ideal for the president, which is kind of like, it is kind of funny when you boil it down to sentiment like that. It's not funny when you think that someone has lost their income. But I don't really know what to make of something like that because, regardless of political affiliation for people, listeners, or just Americans in general, I think we all can probably agree that even though most places in the United States are at will, in terms of employment. Like, people probably shouldn't be fired just because they produced a report that someone didn't like, you know, just generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah. Generally speaking, I I tend to agree with that. And you know, the data itself is relatively accurate. I mean,
Right.
governments, say what you will about governments, but they know a lot about the country. They know a lot about people. And so they're oftentimes the best to put reports together like this. And when we take that away, we take away accuracy of the data.
Right, right. And at the end of the day, like, HR teams, finance teams, businesses in general are relying on these reports. And to your point, like, salary data is really important. And of course, there are companies out there that do this work in a pay to play type of fashion where you have to pay them for these reports, which is fine. But I know I certainly look at BLS reports for even my own information as as an employee. And I know, I mean, maybe there aren't a lot of people out there that do that, but you can see where in like specific states where there's more growth, if someone's like looking to maybe expand where they are, relocate where they are. But also, like, the irony behind all of this, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is that the report itself, like, it's being revised, and this was something that you had mentioned. It's always revised, and at the end of the day, it's we can all already see that the job market is not booming. Like, there aren't hundreds and thousands of jobs being unfilled. Like, we have more, the United States has more unemployed people or seeking employment people than there are jobs available. And that's just generally understood. So it seems a little ironic to, be really freaked out by a report not telling the story that you want it to tell, um, when the story is already being told.
Yeah, and that's, I think, kind of the point. That's not the story they want told. So
Yeah.
they're going to stick their head in the sand.
Yeah. Well, speaking of sand, I'm assuming Texas has some sand, and this is a terrible segue, but our next topic is about Texas, and it really makes me think. All of the work that HR people have to do from an administrative standpoint is obviously very great, and everyone in every job has administrative work. There's always going to be that. However, Texas recently mandated binary sex classifications. I'll read what the summary is behind this, but it does impact HR people in who work for multi-state employers or employ people in the state of Texas, even if you're not a multi-state. And so the summary here is that Texas passed HB 229, defining all individuals as either male or female based on sex assigned at birth, and rejecting non-binary or gender identity based classifications for state data collection. The law applies to all Texas state laws and requires that government data, including demographic reporting, reflect binary classification, so that's male or female. While it allows accommodations for intersex individuals, it removes legal recognition for non-binary identities and aligns with similar measures in other states. It's slated to take effect September 1st, which is only a few weeks away, with some expected legal challenges. And so naturally, for people like me, other multi-state employers, there's a caveat here that you now have to do a little bit of extra work. And frankly, California makes us do a little bit of extra work too, just on the other side of the coin, right? It's like you have to provide way more information. Texas is saying provide less. And I could also see there being the possibility where, let's say, a multi-state employer collects non-binary data. It's not it's includes male, female, and other binary and non-binary categories. And then the HR person on the back end, when they submit for Texas, they have to decide, is that person male or female? They have to actively change the distinction in order to comply with the law, where they're submitting only these binary laws. And I thought about this because in California, where you have to provide the EEO1 reporting, and specific to California, I can't even think of the specific state one. They made it so that you can't, for racial demographics, I can't remember, I think they changed this last year, you can't put like unidentified or unknown, whatever that other option is, if someone does not want to identify themselves or identify their race, I should say. You have to, they don't allow that response anymore. So you have to actually have a race identified for every single employee. And so that puts the responsibility on the HR team either to say, hey, employee, you didn't like actually categorize your race. Can you do that? Or they have to kind of assume, which all of that just seems kind of problematic, whether it's Texas or California. And those are two very different states with very different approaches on these things.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. It's additional paperwork, even though it seems like it's less, because if companies want to have accurate data internally, whether it's for inclusion initiatives or whether it's just to have purely accurate data about who is employed at their company, they're going to have two sets of documentation, one for themselves and one for the state. And to your point, like, there's also some question about like, can we ask somebody, are you male or female? Because Title VII protections still apply. So if somebody doesn't fill it out or they fill out some non-binary choice, then HR has to go back to them or they have to, request their birth certificate. That's essentially what Texas is asking. You have to, what you need to provide to us is what your employee, what is listed on their birth certificate.
Interesting.
And so
Yeah.
that's kind of, it's just creating extra paperwork, extra legwork for HR teams, whether they operate solely within Texas or whether they hire somebody in Texas, because everybody in HR knows you've got to report new hires. Every state has that process,
Yep.
and this is part of that process for Texas now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then it takes me back to like the I-9 process. Like, will HR people, HR leaders and people in Texas then just, say, oh, just provide me your birth certificate. That's going to be much easier for the processing of all these things. Obviously, you do have to store I-9 documents separate from employee files, but I don't know, if I were thinking from like an efficiency standpoint, that's probably one way to manage all of that, because then you're only looking at the birth certificate once. But then that makes me think of another caveat here, which is if someone is an immigrant and they don't have a birth certificate that maybe defines their gender identity, or they're just not a U.S. born person. So in this case, again, an immigrant, and their birth certificate then is not applicable on the I-9, then again, you're kind of back to square one, where you have to go and ask that particular employee, which is more closely identified, or how are you more closely identified? Which, by the way, I think maybe I'm speaking for everyone here, but I certainly do not want to have to ask people who identify as non-binary of the binary options which they identify most closely with. That sounds like a horrible, horrible idea and position to be in. And you can always lean on, oh, well, this is, Texas law, we have to ask this, but it doesn't like make people feel good.
No, it's not. And I also think that might be part of it too. That might be part of the impetus for something like this. I will say real quick about I-9s though. Remember, there are some strict rules around I-9s. You can tell people what identification they can
Is
provide to you
accessible,
that
yeah.
would be compliant, but you can't request certain documentation from them.
Right,
So that's where,
right.
again, it's a fine line, but it gets to that, to your point about using the birth certificate for both. You can't actually ask for a birth certificate.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And maybe to your point, like the impetus, maybe it's like, maybe there is the hope that people will need to provide birth certificates, and it's going to open up this whole other immigration discussion, which is a totally separate topic, and we've talked about it. But yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, look, if anything, there's obviously a value proposition here for having HR teams at companies. I was thinking as we were speaking, like, could AI do this? And I'm like, I really don't think so. This is one of those like very nuanced, like gray area issues. And, I think I asked that question because we're always confronted with this, like, how can AI replace, quote unquote, replacement theory, but replace our jobs. And I really believe that, of course, AI does a lot from an admin standpoint, but for HR admin, like a lot of things are very nuanced, and HR just in general, things are very nuanced. So yeah, I don't know that I don't see AI being able to navigate such a sensitive conversation with people, but maybe one day they'll prove me wrong. And on the subject of AI, Colorado had a special session on AI law. You see, these segues today are just impeccable from me. I don't know what it is, something in the water. Anyway, so Colorado's landmark AI law, which was SB 205, set to take effect in February 2026, imposes strict requirements on high risk AI systems used in employment and other consequential decisions. Obligations include risk assessments, bias mitigation, consumer notice, and transparency measures. Governor Polis has called a special session to potentially delay or amend the law amid industry pushback, small business concerns, and compliance burden warnings. So can you help break that down? Because I feel like I'm still a little confused.
Sure. So this actually goes back to one of the first things that you and I ever spoke about when we first met several years ago, and that is AI software being used in the hiring or employee experience
Mm-hmm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
And the EEOC has put out notices several times over the last few years saying that you're free to use whatever tools you want to use. But if you use AI and that software discriminates against a candidate, a current employee, someone you're terminating, anything in the hiring or termination process, employee lifecycle process, you, the employer, are liable. You may be able to sue the vendor, sure, that we don't care about that. The EEOC says we're coming after you, the employer, if you discriminate. And that's essentially what this Colorado law would do. If passed, it would be the most restrictive AI regulation in the country, and it would essentially set a precedent. It would set guidelines, guardrails on how companies can use AI for recruitment, performance management, any type of workforce analytics that you're trying to get from it. And it's important to remember that with remote work now, even employers not based in Colorado could be subject to this law if you're potentially recruiting candidates in Colorado. Just like if you're hiring candidates nationwide and you put a job posting on Indeed or LinkedIn or something and you don't have a salary range, then you need to note that you're not accepting candidates from places like Colorado, Illinois, New York, California that
Right.
require pay bands in your job description. This would be the same way, the same type of thing. So it would again create sort of a piecemeal type situation where you have to recognize as the internal HR, the hiring manager, whoever's making the job posting, I actually can't recruit somebody in Colorado. I can't post this job nationwide because my AI software has been known to discriminate against prior candidates. So I want to protect the company and I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. So there are lots of considerations that HR teams are going to have to battle with internally, just to do sort of the simple processes of hiring people.
Mm-hmm. Love this for us, you guys. I mean, I was just talking to someone about New York's AI law because someone was kind of going back and forth with me saying, "Oh, you can use AI for recruitment. You just it's not the decision maker. It's just like to screen resumes." And I was like, "No, no, no. You need to understand. New York's law says that screening is a part of the decision making process and therefore requires companies to actually state in their job description, in their job post, I should say, that AI will be used in the process. Like this is, I look at job posts all the time, not only for my own research, but also because it's good to know what's out there. And I think anyone should do that. And when I see jobs posted, 9 times out of 10 says nothing about AI. And I'm like, oh, there's no way that every single job post that I'm looking at is from a company that's not using AI. There's just no way. And I know that that's probably not a crazy thing to say because even with this whole workday thing, a judge just ordered, I think this was back in the earlier part of July, or actually the later part of July, sorry. I'm getting my months confused already. that the judge ordered Workday to supply an exhaustive list of employers that enabled AI hiring. And so this is like not something that's going to go away. And as a believer in using AI technology to support all of the things that we do in HR and business in general, there are just some things that can't just be turned on. Like there are so many considerations to make. And I've even been asked like in like more recent years, like, oh, let's just use like AI. We can use AI. And I'm like, it's not that simple. Because when you do that, you have all of these other implications. And this is before, a lot of these things have come out. I mean, obviously before a lot of these lawsuits. And these lawsuits should scare people enough to take one extra thought and just think, okay, we can use AI, but how are we going to use it? And how are we going to tell candidates that we use it? And how are we still because you still have to have a human element in the process. A big issue, at least from what I've seen and read, especially with the whole Workday and Intuit thing, the big issue fundamentally is that it was like AI just sat and ran, and there was not necessarily a human who was interacting with or really closely connected to where AI was being used. And this is where I really think there's a harmony that has to be a balance and a harmony that has to be struck between human intervention and AI technology. Colorado, interesting.
Exactly, and I think that exactly what you're saying is spot on. Like my sort of take on this is it's kind of like an abstinence plus type take on this
Mm-hmm.
is that you can use AI in these processes if you are determined to do so. But the plus part on this is do not, under any circumstances, discard an applicant from the resume stage onward without having human eyes review that AI decision.
Right.
Human eyes must still look at every single resume. We are not there yet where we can trust AI to review a resume and discard an applicant because it's been trained on biased data, it's been trained on discriminatory data. So we have to have a human step in. First of all, hopefully this human knows what they're doing,
Right.
knows what to look for, and what to avoid. But they have to step in and make sure that they're reviewing these decisions made by AI.
Yeah. So it's just so prudent to me. And I don't know, you see, like, these are some major lawsuits that have come out in recent months with pretty big companies. And that just makes me think of how many small companies that don't necessarily have the budget to have like an in-house recruiter, and certainly not to have an agency, are just like, okay, AI is going to help us with this, and the risk that they're exposing themselves to. um yeah, I think that HR leaders really need to embrace technology as they always should, and embrace AI especially, and also have a more skeptical approach to how these things are embedded in the workplace. I mean, with certain things, like even with I-9, right? Like there are maybe not AI, but more, automated tools like through an HRIS system, for example, that help with an I-9 process. But there's a reason why a human is still collecting the information, storing the information separate from the employee files, and ensuring that it's completed within 3 days of hire. And it's because of the legal implications. And AI and I-9s are very regulated, like so regulated. Whereas AI, as we've talked about, is so unregulated that we have to kind of regulate ourselves. We have to say, okay, well, we know that this technology is not what we can just let run with full trust. Like, we have to play a role in the regulation at a company level, even if someone isn't telling us to do that yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I totally agree. You have to, and that's the thing I think that's important is that you have to know enough to know sort of where the guardrails are.
Right. Right. If anything, just like ask questions. I think, of course, we see all these startups cropping up and they're all like, oh, we're going to make it all easy. It's great. Like, hire your people through us. But you have to just ask the right questions. And certainly there are companies out there that help with hiring from an AI standpoint that are doing all of those things and humanizing. But yeah, I think being scrupulous and asking the right questions is super important. And so with that, actually for our last topic, I don't have a good segue here. It's kind of hard to move from AI to menopause discrimination, but we're going to just do it. Our last topic for this week is the Rhode Island menopause discrimination protections. So Rhode Island, a state that we don't often talk about on this podcast, I must admit. A nice state, though. Everyone should take a trip to Newport at some point in their lives, especially in the fall. Anyway, that's my plug for Rhode Island. Rhode Island enacted a law prohibiting employment discrimination based on menopause symptoms and requiring reasonable accommodations. Employers must revise workplace notices, provide new hire and existing employee notifications, and post information prominently. Examples of accommodations include telework, flexible schedules, additional breaks, or job restructuring. This is very interesting. We see sometimes things, protections like this for fertility and, of course, with pregnancy and other things. I want to know, of course, why it matters to us as HR professionals, although I think we can probably start to understand. My first question, though, is like, why wouldn't menopause be covered anyway under the ADA because it's like a medical event?
Not necessarily.
Oh, tell me more.
Because in many ways it doesn't, in many situations it doesn't prevent you from being able to do your job. So this is a law, this is a state and a law that is now recognizing the fact that even if it technically doesn't prevent you from doing your job, you're not comfortable doing your job, like physically. So take some time off. Like this is one of those things that I think is a move in the right direction to help workers, um, uh, prioritize their health and stop focusing on just, butt in seat and hours put on the job. This is one of those things that is going to create some, as we talked about earlier, with some other things, some ripple effects for internal HR teams, and I expect to see similar things like this in other states. Um, but I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. It's good progress.
Yeah, for sure. I think that really makes sense. That answer helps a lot because, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's almost like an added benefit at this point because it's for women who experience menopause, which I learned recently that women can experience this like in their 30s, which I did not realize. And that's like prime time career moves. It's like all of these, you could come down with all of these symptoms that do in some way affect your ability to socialize or comfort level in socializing and working and working in an office. And so it's definitely very interesting. I mean, I know that there, again, in my sleuthing of job posts out there in the interwebs, I know that there are some companies that offer menopause, both sides of kind of the spectrum here, like fertility and menopause support. So I think it's pretty cool. I didn't necessarily expect or not expect this from Rhode Island. I don't know that we really hear too much from them as a state, but I think that to your point, it's a move in the right direction, especially if it signals to other states that they too might consider ways that they can support their employees.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be specific to menopause either. Like Illinois last year passed, or maybe it was earlier this year, the leave for any reason law. They were the first state in the nation. You can
Oh, I
take
did not know.
leave. Every employer over a certain size has to offer what Illinois calls leave for any reason. You get
Hmm.
a certain number of days off, no questions asked, paid time
Paid?
off.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, it's what they call the leave for any reason law. So obviously this would apply under that, but I like Rhode Island's take on this, sort of separating it out, because then you don't have to use your PTO for
Yeah.
this. You can save that for an actual vacation to Newport in the
Right,
fall.
right. Go to Newport. Yeah, it's true. That's a great point. Actually, something that came up a number of years ago in my own working experience is that working with companies or for companies that had like unlimited PTO, there was such a gray area when people went out on leave or exhausted their FMLA. Like, could they use their PTO? if it was unlimited and for like an unpaid leave. And I think a lot of companies have found themselves in some difficult waters there because obviously it's not accrued. And so unless you have some more kind of guardrails around your PTO policy, it can be an argument for an employee in some cases to say, oh, well, no, I definitely can use my PTO. Like this would be a good reason. And so a lot of companies did ultimately move away from unlimited PTO for a lot of those reasons. And so it's interesting to think about Illinois' leave for anything law, anything leave for anything law. But it also makes me wonder, like, is it easier to just have one category for leaves and then anything can be processed under that leave if it's paid? Like, for example, maternity leave, then you don't have to go through hoops to like classify it with the doctor's note. But I guess it doesn't matter. You still have to have some sort of, I would assume for the leave for anything law, do you have to have a classification, like basically a justification and a doctor's note, or no?
No,
Huh.
you can. I don't remember exactly how much time you get, and I think it varies based on the size of the
Ah.
company.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like let's just for argument's sake, let's say it's 7 days annually. You can use that time for anything. You have to give your employer notice if it's a
Mm-hmm.
non-emergency event, like if it's a vacation to Newport.
Right.
You have to give them notice, but otherwise that's it. You don't have to
Oh,
provide
interesting.
any reason or doctor's note.
Interesting. Well, 7 days, yeah, is different from maternity leave, so I guess it would be prudent to separate. But that's very interesting. I actually had no idea that that happened. I don't know. I mean, that I feel like that should have made the cover of like every magazine. That's pretty cool. Um, yeah, interesting stuff. I mean, we really covered quite the plethora of topics this week, or for this month, I should say. And every month, I'm always like, wow, there's so much going on. And then every month following, there's always so much going on. So thank you, Bryan, for walking us through all of the, hot off the press policy updates for this month. And I guess we'll see where September takes us, or where August takes us when we meet again in September.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Traci.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.